Okay. Hey. Hi, everybody. So, based on yesterday's podcast or live stream, I actually got a request to go over one of the notions that came up in the conversation about the Quest and Bump spread, and this was actually a request from a Patreon. So, Patreons get their priorities. I'm not sure how I feel about the live stream becoming a conversation about tarot overall. If it's what people want to hear about, that's great. I can certainly talk about it. But there was specifically a question about minor arcana. And what I would like to do is I'm going to try to keep this dialed into the practical aspects and what we can go with and take it as far. If anything else, it can be a reflection of certain aspects of life and certain pieces. So I'm going to use this as a theme. We'll see how it goes. The other piece of feedback I got is to cut the intro dialogue short. So we're going to do that. We're going to get right into it. So I want to start with we're going to start with the House of Coins. Now, this is the suit of coins. The tarot is broken. The minor arcana tarot is broken into four different suits. You've got the coins. You've got swords. What? Cups and wands. And then in addition to that, you've got all of the major arcana. Well, okay, so the four suits. Again, the tarot deck as a use of symbols and a creation of symbolism is really dynamic, and many artists have used it as a form of exploring artistic expression. During the Renaissance, a lot of the tarot, a lot of the trump suits, the various trump positions. I mean, this is a card game. It was originally a card game. It's a 72 card game. And it has these four suits, as you would in any other card game. And you have these trump cards. And it was called trumps or tarot. And you would play them, and you'd try to take tricks and the whole nine yards. Anyway, the artists would use tarot cards as opportunities to do interesting art. And some of it was used, often you would do a custom deck of cards. Imagine your own custom deck of cards with your family as members on the card deck, and very wealthy people. We have some Italian examples of some very, very nice tarot decks where they actually used used portraits of individual family members or of other team members or of other people to fill in the various trump suits. But it has evolved, of course, and it has become something where people can use them for various things. I use them for idea inspiration. And the way that I found them to be very effective is when I've evaluated the symbolism in there a certain way. And I wanted to share that with you. So the first thing to know about the tarot deck is the four suits. They represent the four elements. And you can see this pretty straightforwardly. You can see this in the decks. Like, for example, we take the King of Pentacles. So the King of Pentacles here, this guy, you could see that I should have pulled up some of these guys, but you can see that he's got a little bull symbol down here by his throne, and he's got all the rest on regalia, and it's a very green and nice and lovely thing. Well, so the Pentacles represents earth. The swords represents air. The staves represent fire, and the cups represent water. Now, these four are represented in a old elemental sense. And when I looked at elements, I look at all the modern stuff, and you can go online and you can get anything. If you want that, go ahead and read that. But as part of my history studies, I was really interested in the way of the 16th century. I was very interested in 16th century history because I'm involved in a Renaissance fair. And so just like I studied the martial arts, I studied the sword work of that to be a better theatrical performer with sword work, and to learn fight choreography, and to learn all the rest of the things with some kind of historical air, in which case I ended up actually owning and running a martial arts studio where we taught students how to fight with long swords as instructed in a 16th, 17th century manuscript. I went back to that time, and I tried to find out what it was. tried to find out what all these symbols were and where did they come from. And I came across a wonderful book written by Henry Cornelius Agrippa of Nettesheim. It's the book of occult philosophy, the books of occult philosophy. Now this thing is a treasure trove. Now, this isn't about magic and witchcraft and all that other stuff. It's about the ideas about how the world worked before science, before our modern view of science and observation. And a lot of it, is superstition and hogwash. You can throw it all away. But the mental process, the thought processes around how they thought of things is fascinating. It intrigues me. It interests me because I'm interested in the human experience. And out of that period, you had an amazing thing that happened during the Renaissance. You suddenly have access to Greek and to ancient Greek texts by people who could translate it in Greek rather than it having to go all the way around the Mediterranean and come up through Spain in order to bring in material that's been translated by Arabic scholars before it gets there. And you have all this influx of new information and new ideas from Rome and Greece and all these new concepts coming to bear at a time when literacy is important, when because of the plague and the massive loss of population density, you suddenly had an era of invention. You had an era of desire for art and culture and an aspiration to something higher. And there's a lot of theories as to why that happened, but it's a fascinating time. So I wanted to know what the story was. I wanted to know how they thought. And talking about the elements is actually one of the first things that comes up. And it's not what I thought. The elements as they were discussed in Agrippa breaks them into two categories. First is earth and fire. And earth and fire has this wonderful relationship. If you think about the sun and the earth, you got to remember most of human existence has been agrarian. So the idea of the earth and the sun, the warmth of the sun heating the ground, the earth growing, life coming from the earth. These are interesting notions. Now, before about 1700, there was a thought that if you left Earth alone, it would automatically, spontaneously create life. And we know this to be different now. It was also thought, under similar veins, there are articles saying that rotting meat will spontaneously create maggots. It's this idea of you can't see the microscopic. And so we may not know what's going on. But we do know that seeds grow things. We also know that if you leave cement unguarded and unweeded for a while, plants will start growing in the cracks. It's what happens. It will deteriorate. The plants will take over. And so there was this notion at the time that Earth had within it, in a natural sense, its own capability was that of bringing life. That of bringing life to fruition. And from that, it needed a source of energy. It needed a source of light. And the discussion of light was different. There was this, they basically orchestrated it all under the context of fire. Give me just a second here. All right, let's see how that goes. So you've got this context of fire. And so this context of fire comes in two forms. It comes in life-giving, beautiful energy. And we know this today to be, infrared waves. We know this to be light. We know this to be radiant energy. We know all these things about heat now. But in that, everything related to heat had to do with fire. And everything that had to do with light had to do with fire. And they broke it into two forms. One is diabolic fire, and the other is sacred fire. And sacred fire brought life and refreshment and brought all these things. And diabolic fire destroyed. And so you could have that dynamic of the destructive side of energy and heat and flame and fire. And you could have that life-bringing focus. And when you understand these concepts, this concept of light especially, and you start seeing mixed metaphors happen all the time. you start seeing where ideas get cross-referenced. You have the light of the world as a reference for Jesus and for God. And okay, what does that mean? Well, does that mean that it's the sun? No, well, no, it speaks to that notion of light being that unseen, life-giving, empowering, beautiful, elevating force. And I don't think we necessarily need to discard it. Scientifically, we have different explanations for the actual physics of light, but the experience of light and the experience of it as an emotional metaphor is still valuable. And so this idea of light and earth, the energy of life being placed upon fertile ground to bring forth manifestation, that's the relationship between what is actually the suit of wands and the suit of coins. And suit of coins represents that earthly side. So this whole framework of what the suit of coins is about earthly manifestation, about growing things, about building things, about having things come up and having things emerge. Now, a lot of people focus on the major arcana. They talk about the various symbolism because they're heavily steeped in symbolism. They're very, very based on a lot of, there's a lot of various subtle symbols in there if you know what to look for and if you know what you're studying. If you go study some Masonic symbolism, if you go study some esoteric symbolism of the turn of the century, there's a lot there. And so they get a lot of focus. But my interest was actually more in the minor arcana and these suits. And I wanted to figure them out. So I took an approach of these suits are stories. The 2 through 10. The ace represents the overarching story. Here you have the entire story. It's the introduction. It's the cover of the book, if you like. But the 2 through 10, the 2 through 10 of all of the suits reflect stories. And they do reflect stories relative to the element that they're talking about and our experience of them. So what we're talking about here is the story of bringing things into manifestation, bringing things to light, bringing things to life, and having them emerge, in some cases from the effort of our will, in some cases from the careful, studious, and observation in some cases, and the effects of those, and watching what happens to them, and watching how they work. And I think these are valuable and these are effective. So, with that, let me get this guy up in place first. And we'll get this ace put over here. So let's start with the 2 of Pentacles. So I talked a bit about this yesterday, but the 2 of Pentacles, when you start out on trying to make something new, think about when you first take off out of the world, when you leave your house, when you leave your home, when you leave, and I don't mean your home as in you got up in the morning and you had some coffee. I mean, you left home, you left the security of your parents. You went out on your own. You're on your own to grow your own, to figure out, to rely on yourself. Independent. Yeah, independence, freedom, we all love it when we go to college, have that enthusiasm, or when you're in the military, or whatever you do when you got out of the house, really, for the first time. It's chaotic. And here we have that unknown chaos. Here you've got rough seas behind, you've got ships going, cruising along, and this guy's, some people say he's dancing. I just look at it as unstable. It's on one foot. He's got these pentacles in some kind of canted angle. The band of infinity, okay, so I don't know all the symbols of all these things, and I do need to go look at that because it's used a few places. But in this case, I look at this as that instability. When I start, and talk about, my own personal experience with this. When you look at being a manager for the first time, when you go and do this, you think you know what you're doing. It's one of the funniest parts about when you become a manager. So when I became a manager, and it's common enough that it comes up in training material, I became a manager because I was very good at what I did. But what I did wasn't managing. What I did was be able to find answers to solutions and build things. I was an engineer. I used to be a software developer. And then we needed a manager, and I said, well, I'll volunteer for it. And then I went in, and for the first year, I was losing my mind because I was doing full-time development work and full-time management work, and I didn't realize that being a manager was a job unto itself. And this created all kinds of chaos out of the ignorance, out of the not knowing of how to balance and how to keep things in order, not knowing how to balance my time and my energy, not knowing how to find and the value of rest, not understanding that the things that got me into the position where I started were not the things that were going to make me successful on the other side. And so if you want to look at it from the context of being successful, of building what it is going to be the future on that other side, it's coming into the new thing and not knowing how to do it and trying very delicately to balance what you think is important before you know and really know how it works. And, knowing when you're in that position is really valuable, because so many managers think, or so many new managers think that they can't do it. I can always tell how experienced somebody is who's been in charge of something based on how they manage their time, but also based on how they associate, what's important. And they know the balance between, I need to spend more time here and less time here, put more effort here and less effort here. And instead of balancing it, it's working to make things happen. But this requires learning. This requires study. This requires exposure and finding things out. And that is how we come into the Three of Pentacles. So let me get that put over here. Doop, doop, doop. Good enough. All right, so the Three of Pentacles. Now, the Three of Pentacles, being a Freemason and being involved in looking at a lot of Masonic symbolism, the Three of Pentacles is all about building. So this is where we get into the case of becoming a builder. We're going to build something. We're going to make something. We're going to bring something into practice. Now, being a builder is like any other craft. It's like any other profession. You start with an apprenticeship. I mean, in classic antiquity, you start with and actually some current stuff still does it today. But anyway, you start with as an apprentice, and you learn by watching, and by helping, and by doing the heavy lifting, and by getting the water and carrying materials and doing things. And you watch and you expose yourself to the work, and you learn the base principles. And then you become a journeyman. And you begin to do the work at the guidance of a master, at the guidance of the larger architect. You follow the instruction. And here we have a stonemason who is getting ready who is working on and building a temple of some sort. Usually there was a church, especially since we have a monk over here who's looking as though he would like his abbey to be quite beautiful. And then you have the architect showing the plans, giving them the offer. And so you have desire and intent following a plan to skilled labor. And this entire metaphor is really valuable. So it brings into play that notion that we need to learn what we're doing. We also need to learn we also need to learn to a certain extent to pay attention and to follow those that are going to provide instruction for us, and to learn, to actively go and learn. When I keep using the manager example, but this is important to me. I did it for many years. I spent 300 hours a year training myself in the skill sets. Now, I did that for the first couple of years. Admittedly, it dwindled off after that. But the things that I learned from that was how to do my job, how to do what I want to do. And being in an environment of constant learning is just where life happens. And it gives us the capability not only to do what we need to do, but also to learn more of the nuances on how everything ends up being connected and how everything seems to fit together, like bricks in a building, or like a really nicely joined corner. There's a skill set to making things fit together well. And there's a skill set to being able to follow a plan, skill set to being able to see a plan, a skill set to being able to make a plan. And all of these things are things that we can take the opportunity to learn. So where we came in at the 2 with instability and confusion and just, trying to get it by, a little exciting, very adventurous, but very unstable and very difficult and very taxing. Now we allow ourselves to learn how to build, to learn how to bring up things through the process of giving it some order and structure. And so, once we've got ourselves learning, then we do come into the 4. Ha ha ha. That was very funny, coming into the 4. Come on. And there we go. So I've been looking at these cards for a long time, and I don't understand them the same. They're a living system in my mind. I mean, it's a constant imagination development. And the biggest thing that I discover is that it changes as I get older. The 4 of coins, all the focus is on profit. Well, and by profit, I don't mean money. I mean, it could mean money, but really all the profit. Your mind is entirely on the results of what you're trying to build. Your heart is dedicated to what you're trying to build. And the land on which you stand, everything on which you stand is entirely dedicated to what you are trying to build. A friend of mine, and also a patron, pointed out, we went to the Egyptian King Tut exhibit is actually in Los Angeles right now. We went to it not too long ago, and she is a big Egyptian scholar, very, 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 very heavily influenced by. She just loves this stuff, and it's wonderful to go to the King Tut exhibit with someone who studies this stuff actively and consistently for a lifetime, because you get other nuanced stories that you don't hear otherwise. And one of the things that she told me was it was believed of the old pharaohs that when you see the statues of the old pharaohs, their feet are always on pedestals. Their feet are always on little stands. And it was the belief, according to her, it was the belief that if the pharaoh who was God on earth was to touch his feet to the ground, he would stop being magical. And so he needs to perform his magic. He needs to stay in a magical state. He needs to be a high priest of his people, and he needs to remain in this highly magical state. And so this notion here of these feet not touching the ground, but staying on the coins, staying on purpose, staying grounded to the concept rather than to the earth. This is one of those things where really this speaks to when you become obsessive. Now, I've heard a lot of people condemn this, and I don't agree. I think this is a necessary part of building anything. When you become someone who brings manifestation into the world, you build things. You have to give yourself over to it. It has to become your every thought, your every desire, and everywhere you go, and everything you do is just focused in and dedicated to that for a period of your life, for a period of time. That's what it needs to be, and that's what you need to dedicate yourself to. Now, you can become obsessed. You notice this is only the 4. We've got 10 of these cards. We're going through a story. This is the early part of the story. We haven't even made it halfway yet. But in that earlier part of the story, there needs to be that dedicated, focused time. That time when you just absolutely, obsessively give yourself over to what you're trying to build. I have another friend of mine who's getting ready to do that manager to, or individual contributor to manager transition. And, for him, this is what I'm really hoping happens soon, because it ends up occupying every thought. There's going to need to be a need to rework resumes and to rework the way you think about how you've spent the whole period of your life. And I don't think age is related to this. I don't think this is related to maturity, in that I don't think necessarily that this is a experience that happens only once, or an experience that happens when you're only when you're a certain age or in a certain place in your life. I think it happens as for any number of causes, and it can happen numerous times. But when it does come, you really need to give it your all. This is giving yourself over to the cause. This is really dedicating yourself. And we need to balance it. Like I said, we need to balance it. This isn't going all the way. This is just giving everything over to it in order to make it happen. We see a lot of people that, start something new and want to make it work and want to try, but they won't give it their all. They don't give it every waking thought. I was up till 1 a.m. reading through my books on this to talk about this today. You have to be obsessed with what you want to grow and what you want to build, and that's okay. It's a good thing in this stage of the process. But that does lead us to a point where we will begin to manifest. With dedicated effort, we will begin to manifest, and we will begin to see the fruits of those labors. We'll begin to see the acquisition. And that's when this starts to turn. This begins to start looking like hoarding. It begins looking like disproportionate obsession, not focus, not dedication, not full in investment, but actual obsession and being possessed by the notion at the expense of what is good. And that's where we get into the 5 of coins. And this is really, I like the 5 of coins a lot, because it's a great, it's almost as though they give us a moral reminder. Sorry, I gotta get let me get this up here. So when we're looking at the 5 of coins, the 5 of coins, here we have the destitute outside what we assume is a church, because it's a stained glass window with 5 coins on it. From the inside, it is beautiful, and you can see all the events. And this is that idea of seeing the light come through the window and being on the inside of the window and seeing, this is the world of wealth, of what we built. And we can actually benefit from it. And we're protected from the elements, or we are one of those, we become one of the haves versus the have-nots. And then we begin to see what the impact that not having what we've built has on others. So if, for example, I don't know if anyone is more acutely aware of how sad a lonely person is as a friend of that lonely person who has a good family and good friends and good fellowship. They can see the suffering. If they don't get lost, if they actually can look out away from the obsessive environment, they look out. It's the I am in a warm house, so I'm going to open my front door and look and see what's out there and see what's in the cold. And here we find the old, we find the infirm, we find those that don't have what we have built. And there's one voice that says, if they want it, they can build it themselves. Sure, there is that. That's true. There's also the other side that says, not everyone can build this thing that I am building. And I need to acknowledge that there are those who don't. There are those who don't have those things. In my world, I have a way of looking at productivity and a way of looking at empowerment and all that is possible before me in my grasp. But I recognize that is something I've cultivated over years, and it's a wealth that I have. And I see so many who don't have it. I see so many that when I hear them, they talk about their struggles and their difficulties. And sometimes it's just a practical struggle. It's just, that's really hard right now. And that's fair. But sometimes I see self-induced struggling. I see people who struggle only because they only have one mindset. And because their mind is that way, that's going to keep them there. And maybe if I can help them out, I might be able to do that, because I think that as human beings, when we are comfortable, that is when we are able to go, when we're comfortable in our own creation, in what we have built. That's when we're able to go and give to others. That's when we're able to actually stop and see others and see the suffering of others. I know a lot of people who see the suffering of others as someone who hasn't built. And then they champion, somebody should do something about this. But it's the people that have built that look at things and say, I may not be able to do anything about the worldwide problem, but for you, friend, come in and let me give you some respite for a small period of time, or maybe give you something that helps you build for yourself a longer lasting solution. And so this notion of charity, of human charity, which I don't think you can really do well unless you have something to give. The need for it is apparent, and that's where we've come in to the Five of Pentacles. And of course, as a response to the Five of Pentacles, you can already see it coming, is the Six. And the Six is kind of almost a direct answer to that. And this is why, you start seeing this, and when you start seeing these transitions, what do we have? Well, now we have charity. I mean, it's almost as, yes, of course there's a story. Yes, in the Four, we build through our obsessiveness. Five, we become aware of what we have, and those who don't have in Six, we begin to give. And this is the benefit. There's one piece here, though, that is a lesson on being generous and being gracious, and that is, notice that he's a man who carries a balance. There is a balance to the Six of Coins is not only about being generous and not only about doing the contribution, but balancing it. Because it is, there's that notion, it's like the firemen, they say that the firemen in fireman training, and apparently in police training, so a policeman friend of mine said, they train them not to risk their lives to save another. Save a life if you can, but not at the expense of your own life. Because if you die in the process of saving one, then everyone else you might have saved throughout the rest of your career won't have you to save them. It's not an equal exchange. And so, though it's hard and though it's painful, you don't always save all that are lost. You have to preserve your ability to save those you can. And this manifests in a number of ways. Now, in the charity case, it's very easy to see, but I want to offer this in the management case. Let me give you another way of looking at it. If I am a manager and I have the ability to work with my team to ideate, to come up with different ideas that allow us to move the needle forward on our projects, that's a very desirable skill. A lot of people want to have that conversation with me. Okay, that's fine. Now, if I'm having 6 of these conversations and they're just wearing me out, then my brain starts to, these conversations don't come instead of my other work. I still have to do my other work too. And so if I give all my time to do this, to share the wealth of what I have built, which is the opportunity to find opportunity, the way to stay empowered and whatnot. If I spend all my time doing that, then am I wearing out my source of that, which is the sharpness of my mind? If I give up my rest so that I can continue to offer my ideas or my guidance or my emotional savvy or my compassion, if I give up my rest on these things, then my supply of what I'm giving starts to dry up. And so here's that notion of keep the balance. Be generous, but do not sacrifice. And so here's this whole different way of looking at what our obligation to the world is, what our obligation to bring to the world is. Our obligation to the world is to create enough that we can be generous. I think it's a beautiful story. And yet we have to be generous, and we have to constrain and balance our generosity with what we have available and what we need to continue to sustain our ability to build and grow. And while we're sustaining that ability to build and grow, we have to know when we need to take action and when we need to not. So we see the need. We've built up some resource. We see the need. And then we now know what we can give. But we balance our giving with what we also need to sustain and preserve ourselves. And this is key. So then moving on to the 7. It's kind of a... Come on. There we go. So, moving on to the 7. And honestly, I could do 7 and 8 kind of side by side on this one. You can see it coming up. 7 is when you allow your investments to grow on their own. It's one of the forms of building. It's when you plant and then you watch your plants grow. It's setting things in motion. I talked about the flywheel. There's this notion of a flywheel, of momentum, of things carrying you through. And when you're in that state of momentum, especially if you've established it to be some kind of upward spiral where just in maintenance things are increasing, sometimes it's best just to watch them increase and identify when the right time to harvest is. And so in this lesson of growing, it's, and learn to leave it alone, when you're worried about, when you're actually succeeding, sometimes it's just best to don't mess with it. It's doing fine. And so this is the notion of the 8 of Pentacles. And in here, I don't know in the 7 of Pentacles, in the 7 and 8, I don't know that there's I haven't found a whole lot of really deep esoteric meaning here. It really is just kind of that message of things are growing on their own. Know when to see that. Know how to recognize that. And then know how to get the heck out of the way when things are going well. I've watched quite a few things undo or unmake or unsucceed themselves, the stealing failure from the jaws of victory kind of thing. It's just, it's know when to hold off. And I think that's important to have that. And then, likewise, like I said, I could probably do this one right side by side with it without too much effort, is to know, all right, now that we have that, what's the other one? And that's the Seven of Pentacles, is really doing the work. Sometimes it's just tradecraft. You've got to do the labor. And I kind of look at those 7 and 8 as a wonderful pairing, putting together the moments where you can say, all right, here we are at the growing time, where we need to leave it alone. Here we are at the working time when we really need to focus on it. Sometimes we've got to go in and just do the work. And so this is a card representing that. And so here you have, once you've established your growth pattern and what you've got it, sometimes you've got to work. Sometimes the work can be done for you. Really isn't a whole lot more complicated than that, at least in my interpretation. This story of building, of course those exist. Of course there's a part of it. And then from there, we move on to getting to the actual achievement, the actual end state of what's working, when it's working. And that's the 9 of Pentacles. The 9 of Coins. So, with the 9 of Coins, so the 9 is a fascinating thing because, well, there are only 8 coins on the card. So where's the 9th coin? And this is the one that I love, because this is, okay, so it's getting into the fruitful bounty. There's grapevines behind it, which means it's summertime. Trust me, it's summertime. You've got the summertime of life. You've got everything going. You've got a successful woman with the sign of nobility in that she's got a pet bird of prey. I mean, you didn't do that unless you were truly, truly wealthy. And so actually, she has become the effect of the building. She herself is the 9th pentacle, the actual 9th coin, the 9th symbol. And she, being the person, is the outcome of a life well lived. There's all the knowledge, and having done it and having built and having seen the need, having been generous, knowing when to work, knowing when to let go, knowing what to do, having done the investment, now comes the final state of actually transformation of self. You become different. You become a different person based on what you have built. And this is really kind of it's one of the cards that I'm in love with. Honestly, I love this notion that by going through this process, you transform. And that by going through this, you become the noblest of what humanity can be. Because in here we're talking about manifestation, we're talking about industry, we're talking about building, we're talking about making. And to be one who makes, to be one who has built, to be one who produces, to be one who contributes, who adds, who brings more to life. To be that is to become the great manifestation of what we have to work with. And I love that. I love that notion. And finally, when you have become the manifestation of what man was put on earth to do, if you will allow me to say that, then we move on to the next, which is the 10 and the end of the journey. And here you have the old man, up in his years, very, very rich cloak, taking time to pet a dog. The arrangement of these pentacles, however, is very specific. It is arranged into the pattern of the Kabbalah. And so this speaks to the being ready to now focus on other things, being ready to now work the transformation of the soul, which if you read a couple of older writings, there was a belief that soul work was a task that could only really be done if you were a man of luxury, in that you were a man of leisure. You could put the time in, you could dedicate your time to isolated study, and you didn't have to worry about all of the rest of it. You didn't have to worry about profit. So here we were with this whole notion of this entire story of production, of growth, of wealth, of building something, of bringing something to life, so that we can rely on that and we no longer have to burden ourselves with it. Then and only then are we ready to evolve ourselves spiritually. Are we ready to step into that next level? And this is one of those cases where I kind of like the older ways of looking at things. I like the older ways of where, look, take care of yourself first. Take care of your needs, your obligations. Take care of what needs to make it sustainable. Tend to that. And then after you've done that, when you've spent your vital years doing that, when you have arrived at this point where you yourself are ready, you have manifested that which we are put here to do, which is to create and build. When you have done that, whether that's a family, or whether that's a career, or whether that's an income, or whether that's a project, or whether that's the physical labor of your hands, or whether that's an artistic craft, whatever it is that you do, whether it's talking to people online, or whether, to help what change you grow and you bring forth and you manifest. When you do that and you've become that so thoroughly that you become the change that you manifest, and that you yourself are the gift, then you are ready to go and pursue the elevation of the spirit. And that's really what's next on that list, is going and taking that on. Until then, you've got work to do. And this is the story of the House of Coins. This is the progression that I see as it goes. And I enjoy the story that it tells. And it's been really, really valuable to me. Now in this, there's also the suits. There's also the talk about the face cards. And those are a different conversation because they don't fit in the story in the same way. And so I do kind of set them aside. There we go. So the suit, the face cards, the page, the queen, the king, and the knight. They're a different paradigm. But I do want to talk about this transition. Now all four of the suits have stories like this that go. The two that are linear, in my current interpretation, are the House of Coins, the coin suit, and the staves suit. The two that are non-linear are cups and swords. But they're all these reflective exercises. They're all these ways of reflecting on life to see where we are, where we're going, and where it's going to lead. And it becomes a way of checking ourselves. Are we ready to see this? Are we ready to work with this? Are we ready to go with this? And it becomes a symbolic language which allows our heart's wishes to communicate with us in a way that we can bring to the fore and understand. So there we go. That's the House of Coins. So I will add, again, this is at the request of a Patreon. So if you would like me to talk about something else, come find me on Patreon and get up on the Discord or just send me a message, and we'll talk about it. We'll chat. I'm always happy to talk about what people want to talk about. I find it valuable, but I don't know if you do if you don't tell me. On the other side of the coin, if you have any interest in helping me further things along, by all means, subscribe on Twitch. Also, I do post these to YouTube afterwards. Do that. And if you're looking for me, and if you want some personal one-on-one time, or you just want to say hello and tell me what a horrible job I'm doing, whatever that is, reach out. Love to hear from you. I'm going to wrap it up here. We'll talk to you later. Probably going to do 3 more of these, of course, to talk through these suits, but we'll see. I'll talk to you later.